Hello everyone, hope you got your first suits on because we're playing Fire Emblem Ignorant Dawn, or rather, we're analyzing it and the units within it, and mostly furry units that are furry. Laguz, basically. Mekkah here, joined once again by the original Raisins. How's it going?
I'm doing excellently. I got really worried for a second when you opened the episode that way, but I'm like, you know what? It makes sense. And I think in solidarity with these Laguz, I may change it. I'm kidding. Let's just get right into these Laguz, right?
Webcam turn on.
I know, yes. It's proof. I got my wolf ears ready to go.
Okay. Do not worry, this is not my actual setup for how I'm doing part 4. This is just for the convenience of the discussion. I'm not sending all my cavalry to the Silver Army. There will be a rearrangement once I'm done, but all the units we're discussing today, all the Laguz we're discussing today are in the Hawk Army, and then we have the two Falcon Knights, Sigrun and Tanith in the Silver Army over here. We'll do them last. But we'll start with, discussing all the Laguz. And we forgot a couple earlier on. We forgot Lethe, we forgot Mordecai, and we forgot Volug early on. And we're going to start with Volug because he's the most different of them all. He's in a different army and everything, so give it up for Volug, I guess, and his 40U steel sword that he's still carrying around for Zhark. His support bro. Yeah, somehow we forgot Volug, even though he was super important for part 1. And now, instead of looking ahead of like what he's going to be like for the rest of the game, we have most of the best part of Volug behind him. He is definitely peaks in part 1 and part 3. And, I mean, what can I say? I'm really satisfied. I did overrate him a bit, I think, initially. Thinking like, oh, he could just take any hit and he's like at risk of dying several times. I thought of Volug kind of in the same ranks as Nyla, Tyronio, Black Knight, Muarem, or like, oh, this is one of my invincible pre-promotes / Laguz that just doesn't die. And on some part I knew he wasn't all that, like he probably missed KO somewhere, or he doesn't have that much durability compared to them. But I was still overestimating him a little bit, even though part of me knew he wasn't that good. But he's still very good. He still does a lot of damage. He doesn't care about getting experience, so he can just not KO something, which is fine, and still get strike rank. But a lot of the time he does kill things, and a lot of the time he does survive things. And I think what really made him invaluable in this playthrough is his earth support with Zhark. That probably saved his life numerous times where he definitely could have died. And Volug is not the most convenient earth partner because he does have to deal with Laguz gauge and being untransformed for a while. So there was a couple turns, especially in part 3, because that's when he's no longer automatically transformed if you take half shift off of him. So there were a couple turns in part 3 where the Laguz gauge really had him tripping, but at least part 3 is easy enough to manage where you can work around it, but it was definitely annoying to have to hold back Zhark over it. That was definitely a bit anxious for me at times. But at the same time, you can't argue with results. Volug does a lot of damage. Beast folded and 1-hit KO enemies in 3E with surprising ease. He's almost at SX strike rank, and it's easily my second best unit for part 3 and easily one of the better contributors of part 1. And I just enjoy him and his funny language shenanigans a lot. I do wonder how important he'll be for part 4 because sure, part 4 gives us a lot of units to work with that will be very helpful, but it also has a lot of enemies to cover across 3 different routes, and Volug might still be relevant just because he's almost at SX strike, and we might just find enough time for him to still be helpful. And he has 30 speed right now if he doubles his speed with a normal transformation, which, as far as I can tell, is enough to double Paladins in 4 Prologue if it's in there, for example, or some other enemies somewhere else. I think 30 speed is enough to help out there. And, I mean, 11 strength looks kind of modest, but it gets doubled to 22, and then he has the S rank and soon-to-be SS strike to back it up, and maybe he'll be helpful, but I haven't got a whole lot of experience of part 4 Volug. What are your experiences?
Yeah, so I would like to kind of go into the experience of part 4 Volug. But before that, I kind of want to ask, you briefly mentioned like a full transform. Did you have anything to say about the half shift versus the full shift, or well, because that is a pretty unique mechanic to Volug?
It is, yeah. I'm kind of assuming people saw or have played a little bit, I'll admit, but you can definitely tell he's stronger in part 3 when you take off half shift. But I've never tried using half shift in part 3, so I don't have a one-to-one comparison, right? I just have half shift in part 1 and then full shift in part 3. But, he definitely looks a lot more impressive when he's full shifted. But you also have all those problems you have to work with. So yeah, that's been my experience generally.
Yeah, ideally just like swallow the grass and deal with it, right? But yeah, I will answer your question about part 4 of Volug. So most of the time when I've tried to use Volug, I gotta say he falls off like awfully in part 4, if not sometimes during part 3. In fact, like whenever we kind of like laid out our projects for Volug and thought, this is what we're going to do with this unit long term, support partner for Zhark, they seemed like too optimistic to be true. I was like, there's no way Volug is going to be this good. Even something like when you mentioned the double Earth support, I was like, it's not going to help Volug. He's going to get thumped in 3-12. It's not even close. But I'm actually really surprised to say that I was proven wrong in 3.12 and to another extent in 3.13. Volug contributed like really well in both of those maps. I understand part of it was like 3.13 with the Beast Foe, but even just having the 15 speed to double was... I wonder, did we like get lucky with any speed procs, or what's his normal bases?
Let me pull up his actual bases, because right now he has 15, and his base is actually only 13, so he procced 2 out of 4 levels at 40% growth, so about average. And
about average.
He has no strength procs, absolutely none.
Oh,
0 out of 4 for 25% growth. He did get a defense proc at some point. He got 2 defense procs with a 50% growth though, so he got lucky there. You were definitely worried about Volug's survival in a couple points, I think in 3.13, maybe even chapters before that, which is probably warranted. I think enemies might have prioritized Zhark just because his bulk might have been a bit lower too, like lower HP probably, and that might have saved him along the line a little bit. But I definitely, like I said, I have a tendency to overestimate Volug's durability especially.
Yeah, no, it's he is a quite frail, especially even in like part 1. It's pretty easy for him to be taken out sometimes, right?
Yes, especially if fire mages are involved.
Yeah, fire mages are involved. Sometimes even like just, oh wow, my Volug died because like 3 physical units attacked him. Right? It's
which is strange because he has like 50 HP and then like not this much defense. He usually has like, let's say 20 defense, maybe 18 even, which sounds like a lot, right?
Yeah, it's like 16, I think, when he half shifts.
Oh, true, the half shift, that definitely changes things with his bulk, yeah, true.
Yeah, it's a little bit lower in part 1, but I exaggerate maybe when I say 3 physical units, but he can definitely go down if you just kind of like send him forth into the enemy. It's like, oh wow, my Volug, who's a game over condition, just died. But,
yes.
Yeah, no, but part 4 Volug is, every time I've tried it, it ended up being really inconvenient or not able to work out in one way or another. But I think part of it might have been I was sending him to the wrong army. I mean, in Silver Army, which I think is where we're planning to send him, because I think you said, oh, we're going to move him into the Mekkah army.
That's what I usually do with him anyway. That's like my default option for him.
True, yeah. Yeah, he's got all those calves there, and they're like really slow and easy to double. So that's really good for him. And I do totally think, like, even if we don't start the map with double S strike, we're gonna have double S strike like really quickly, right? So like because we're just doubling the enemy every time. This is like how many? I want to say there's like 11 combats away for double S strike. So like basically right there.
You can keep track of that throughout part 4. You'll be a hero. Yeah, I like 4 prologue for him. I like Silver Army for him because I mean 4 prologue anyone can do it, so I might as well send him, I guess. And I like the Grill Mercenary part is a bit more demanding of your benchmarks, whereas I feel like the Hawk armies for either people who are you just need to like add on to what you don't have yet, which is generally reliable 1 to range, or it's someone who can cheese like 4-5, or it's someone you want to train in 4-5. And I don't think Volug fits any of those categories. And then also there's the part about like where the Silver Army has to deal with a desert, and Volug is one of the better people in the desert. So by default, I kind of want to over prepare for that too. So that's why I default him. Is that where you send him to?
No, lately I've been sending him to the Ike army just to mostly have the Earth, because like my plans for Volug are much less ambitious usually. I'm like, this guy's going to just definitely fall off by now, so just see him as Earth Affinity bot and nothing more, frankly. But that might actually be a misuse of him. So I'm actually really looking forward to seeing how he does in the desert.
Yeah, he does have to go to the same army as Zhark for either of them to be very effective, and Zhark is not in his best in the Silver Army, so that might actually be a puzzle to figure out. He might end up somewhere else after all. Depends on how well we can. I can check what Zhark's prospects are.
Yeah, no, it's
probably one of them is going to have to be the bot for the other. Is what I'm predicting. Like one of them is going to have to be a flunky. The other one is going to be the carry wherever they go.
Do you think the roles are going to get reversed in part 4? Like you mentioned, he was holding back Zhark because Volug's movement, Volug's positioning was really demanding. But in part 4, it might actually be the opposite. We kind of I don't know. Zhark kind of destroyed Ike, so
he did destroy Ike, but he did destroy unpromoted Ike.
True.
So,
and with several procs too. Like, so what if he gets in a part 3 or part 4 map and just doesn't proc things?
Yeah.
Also, his 1-2 range is kind of shaky. Well, it's better than Volug's, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I think the way I'll go about it is if a Z-Hark seems long-term viable, I'll try and pick whatever is best for Z-Hark. If it doesn't turn out that way, then I'll send him to the Silver Army. If it... one idea could be to send them both to the Hawk Army, because both of them are decent there. And then there's a chance for Z-Hark to train for endgame if I think he's viable, after 4-2, for example. But there's also just... The Barn Army almost always just needs a couple extra hands, and it doesn't matter if they're not optimal, I just need a lot of people to, you know, make up for the fact that I still have to route one map there, and then the second map can be a training arc or not.
That's right. So speaking of training arc, I do also want to bring up his strike rank. I do think as we kind of flip through the rest of our Laguz, that Volug's strike rank is going to be a pretty clear example of like a little bit of favoritism that we've given him compared to the other Laguz over the course of this run. And so we're kind of like talking about all these plans for Volug, when I think he's like probably strictly worse than most of the Laguz that are coming up, except a small number of exceptions, except for the strike rank, right? So I think the strike rank really is kind of like holding his entire plan together. Like if you look at his strength, if you look at his speed, if you look at his defense, it's all like way worse than even kind of like unimpressive units like, you know, Mordecai or Ranulf. I'm pretty sure Volug's stats are just completely lower than all of them. And then if you carry them to Janaff or Ulki, it's like, get out of here. He's way worse. But the strike rank is really keeping him together right now.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the Laguz. A lot of them haven't even hit S-rank strike yet, like you said, so that's fair. But, you know, some of these Laguz are also really bad, so I don't know. We'll see how he compares to, like, Ranulf, for example, because that, I think, is the most telling comparison. Because if you can compare to Ranulf, you know, there's something there, but if you cannot, it's only going to get worse from there.
Remind me, did we energy drop Ranulf?
Yes, we did. Should we just take a look at Ranulf then? Because he's pretty much next anyway, right? Yeah, might as well.
Screw it.
Might as well.
Let's take him next.
All right. So, yeah, those stats are pretty good. The speed is the same, though. Speed is the same as Volug. So the
speed's the same.
They double the same, but that's a good amount of speed. That's 15 speed. That's 30. That doubles pretty much everything. That's good. The problem with Ranulf and all the Cat Laguz, like, we might as well just get these drawbacks out of the way because they're going to be a theme for the next 3 units or so. Managing Gauge kind of sucks, even in part 4. You do get some Laguz gems that could make up for it in the desert, and then for the second half of part 4, you can just kind of ignore Laguz Gauge if you're willing to spend a gem on a character, and then depending on who goes to endgame, that is either worth it or it's not worth. But I like using a couple gems every now and then on like Janaff or Ulki, especially because they're so good that you just want them to be transformed for the entire map. I don't know if the same goes for Ranulf. He's forced onto the Hawk Army, so he doesn't have too much reason to rush his gauge there. He might as well just grass it and help out whenever he needs to, and he can have most of the other units carry the combat for him. And that's been the way that he has been used for part 3 for me, and generally the way I treat him in Aggro Mercenaries, which is, it's weird because Ranulf is that unit that I think on paper always looks really impressive, like stat-wise. This is his base level, by the way, like 12 XP is all he got in part 3, even though I was really hoping to use him. I spent an energy drop on him. He normally has 14 base strength. And I'm still not a huge fan of how he plays, but it might be because I hold him back instinctively, because there's other units that can do the job that don't require constant upkeep with grass, and units that gain more experience. So it's both Ranulf doesn't get a whole lot out of fighting, and I don't get a whole lot out of fighting, but I do have to invest the Olivia grass, and like, that kind of makes me hold back on him. But I was hoping I would encourage myself to use him a bit more with the energy drop. So maybe I can get squeeze some more juice out of him with if he's going on the Hawk Army with the energy drop behind him, because I was pretty impressed at times with how he did when he did get into combat. He does, I think, 1-round Halberdiers, which is kind of the usual average benchmark I like to use. Is like if this unit can 1-round Halberdiers or perform like adequately against them, they're at least worth looking at. And you know, he has the speed to double just about everything. So even if he doesn't 1-round KO, he still gets strike rank, and then someone else can clean up, kind of similarly to how Volug performs in part 1. But I still think managing Cat Gauge is just annoying. It just annoys me, and Bjork don't annoy me when I have to use him like that. And if you're gonna make me manage Laguz Gauge, just I need a little bit more than what Ranulf offers. And then the other units still have gauge issues, like Ulki and Janaff, like we'll get into. But at least they're really, really, really good in a lot of different ways, whereas Ranulf just gives me passable to good combats with worse gauge. That's my allergy with Ranulf. He's like, he's fine, but I have like more than enough to not need him most of the time. So he's he's awkward. But you're kind of like a big fan of Ranulf, right?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just, I kind of want to latch onto something that's unpopular and, like,
yeah,
go with it, right?
I wasn't about to call you a hipster, but I was about to call you a hipster.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Now, like, okay, so these base stats, I'm trying to, like, subtract the energy drop here and go 14 strength instead, right? So, yeah, those base stats are pretty good for, like, fighting a lot of the enemies in early part 3. I think in late part 3, they end up being, like, quite a bit short on most enemies, right? So, like, you're not going to be one-rounding halberdiers. You're probably not going to be one-rounding anything, in fact, with just the 14 strength, even when it's doubled to 28, and when you add in the, I think it's 8 from the claw. How much is this claw right now?
Let me show you.
Yeah,
come on,
please.
please work. There you go.
Wiimote blues, thank you.
Yeah,
definitely a Wiimote. Yeah, this doesn't really look like a whole lot of attack. I will say it is more attack than what actually. Sorry, I was trying to do some mental math right here. I think this is the same amount of attack that Volug has with S-Rank Strike. So if Ranulf is 1 strike rank behind Volug, then they're going to have the same attack here.
Yeah, that's true. I think Volug had like 11 strength, so that sounds about right.
Yeah, so that's essentially how that math boils down.
Yeah, but they face different enemies, so it's kind of hard to compare, right?
Yeah, and frankly, Volug's enemies are a lot easier to deal with. Also, Beast Foe exists, so if you just want them to one-round things, you just give them the Beast Foe. And I will say, like, speaking of being in a different army, Ranulf is in the same army as, like, Titania and Har and Ike and a lot of these other units whom we gave, like, really glowing reviews to earlier. And so outside of kind of, one-off stuff such as 3-4, where he has to get to the top and he's one of the units who can kind of, like, negotiate ledges easier than Titania, then, like... On that map, he's fine, but then on all the other maps, you kind of have this awkward unit who, though he might move very far, still doesn't have the 1-2 range that some of your other more powerful units have. Still has to deal with his gauge and use 2 turns to set up. At least it does exist in the same army as a dancer.
Yeah.
And so he can kind of like use that dancer to do turn 1 double grass, turn 2 transform. And I will say that, like, on whenever you can transform him, usually it's better to just transform him, where he's a game over condition. So it's no sense having a game over condition just kind of like prowling around untransformed. And then again, like when he's transformed, his movement increases, and so it becomes a bit easier to find opportunities to bring him in there. And even if you transform him and then you don't really find any great avenues for combat right now, you can wait a turn. The gauge will go down, but it actually takes like a large number of enemies to take him out from full gauge and like begin attacking him. And frankly, there aren't many places in part 3 that have the volume of enemies required enough to attack Ranulf all in one go and de-gauge him and get an actual attack in.
Yeah.
So there really aren't that many places like that.
Yeah, and what I'm always afraid of with Ranulf is if I do bring him into battle, then 2 ranged enemies will prioritize him, and even if they don't kill him, at least if my Gatri with the 1 range weapon gets its attack, I don't lose gauge over it, so it doesn't really matter. But Ranulf is like, I get attacked by a 2 range enemy, I lose gauge, and nothing happens. That's just the worst unit feeling in the world, you know what I mean? It's like, I spent all this time getting him up there, and then he just does nothing. Whereas, like, I think like 3-7, for example, there's the worst, because 3-7, you don't even have to fight anything necessarily. You could end turn like 7 times to win that map, basically, if you really wanted to. You lose out on some things, there's some experience, some extra character maybe, but you could just do nothing. So if you go into that map, you transform Ranulf and he doesn't do anything besides attract enemies that you didn't want to fight with him, that's like, you played yourself. Which sucks. But, I mean, I do think he's useful when you're just short a couple hands. Like, there were a couple spots in part 3, like late part 3 even, right, where we were like, well, we need an extra action. How about we just have Ranulf come in, involve him in the 4-way dance and just get him going, and then he will suddenly start being helpful.
There you go. Can we take a quick look at his build as well real quick? Or, because
like
I had his con and weight. It's not really that good. Maybe when transformed is much better. But I had this small thought of like taking Smite off of Mordecai and using it on Ranulf.
It works in Path of Radiance.
It works there, yeah. He's kind of like really good for that. You got like Demiband too in order to help. But the thing is like, I had this thought of, well, if Ranulf is force deployed and neither of us are too hot on his combat, is there some utility role he can fill? But even this seems like kind of dubious.
Yeah. I mean, I do think the shoves he provides occasionally to like slightly lighter units can be helpful. I think he can shove maybe Boyd or Ike. I don't remember exactly who, but I think he definitely did some of those things too. Like even something like super flunky-ish, like I have a nearly perfect 4-way dance, but one person's out of position. Ranulf can just smite him back there, or you can smite Raisin, or you can shove Raisin for free. Like that kind of stuff helps a little bit. It's nice because like this is all stuff he doesn't need the deployment slot for.
Have you ever had him do like tons of stuff in part 4, or is he normally just kind of like kills a guy in 4-2 and then that's it?
You know, it's like a reinforcement in 4-2 where there's like a warrior that comes from the back. That's like the Lucian Ranulf show for me. That's kind of what he does.
Yeah,
generally.
Basically. Saying that's like the extent of it. I've never brought him to endgame.
Yeah, same. I think if you brought him to endgame, you definitely have to preserve some Laguz gems for him. But he'd probably do okay at some things. But I think there are funnier cats you can bring to endgame if you really wanted to.
Yeah, no. Shall we go on to the funnier cats?
Shall we look at some of the funnier cats? So
yeah, let's go. 3 in a row.
Yeah, I like these two. I don't know. They probably don't need to be done together, but they're kind of similar. So I think with these two, like Lethe is another filler for part 2, like another person that's just there. You kind of have to use her, or else you're just losing out. So you have a unit that can transform relatively quickly, double some people, maybe one round some frailer enemies like tier 1 enemies, do some chip damage to something else. Free the way for other units like Lucia or Alincia or whoever is in a party with her at the time, and she's helpful. And then you get to part 3, and well, she has like Ranulf stats divided by 2 almost is what it feels like.
Yeah.
So every drawback that I said earlier about Ranulf applies to Lethe, on top of having stats that are so much worse that for this kind of unit you have to really dedicate yourself. Like you have to say, okay, this playthrough I am using Lethe, and because I'm using Lethe and I'm gonna do my best to make it work, you're gonna hoard some stat boosters for her. And fortunately Laguz use stat boosters really well, so an energy drop gives her +2 strength, which doubles to 4 when transformed, which doubles to 8 when they actually double. And 24 is like, I wouldn't call it a sweet spot, but it's at the point where your doubling is not completely out of reach. And Lethe, I know Lyre has a 70% speed growth. I'm gonna double check Lethe's speed growth real quick, because I remember it being kind of okay. Yeah, it's 50%. So if you really dedicate yourself to using Lethe, like have her chip things a lot, and then once enemy level starts increasing, you give her some XP, she can probably kind of stay doubling, but she might just need a speed wing as well. And then, I mean, sure, you have budget Ranulf. Like, you're working really hard to get Ranulf, but at least you can say it's Ranulf, but it's a girl with cute cat ears. That counts for something for some people, and that's fun. I think that type of unit is much more fun to use than Ranulf, because you're working hard to make something good out of something that starts out in a pit. So I think that speaks for Lethe when it comes to, how fun is this unit to use. But other than that, obviously I can tell you all about how bad she is long term. I do think, though, that she faces a bit of competition for Lyre in that regard, because Lyre stats are even worse.
Yeah.
And so you can, you have more funny factor when you're using Lethe compared to Lyre. Like, Lyre is the exact same as Lethe in this regard, just 10,000% worse, and then no part 2 availability to make up for it. So she's even more extreme in that regard, but all the more hilarious for it. Like, especially the speed on her is so.
Hey, this is awful.
It's these stats would not look out of the place in the Dawn Brigade in some ways, but sure, these aren't transformed, so maybe they would look a little bit better when she actually is transformed. But 22 is like, we complained about speed about that level for the Grill Mercenaries in previous episodes, and Lyre just has it, but she has the gauge issues, she has the one range issues. She's so awful that it's hilarious to me. So that's why I think Lyre is funnier, and that's why I trained Lyre, but I've never trained Lethe. I enjoyed using Lyre in my Iron Man. Unfortunately, the dream didn't last, but it was hella funny when it lasted. I actually got a strength proc, I think, multiple times with her, despite her, she had like 25% strength growth. It's really funny. 35% strength growth, actually. Her strength growth is higher than Ranulf's. It's great. So
yeah, but
really
how
fun.
far? It's like 9 points behind, or no, 7 points behind.
She's working on it. All right, she's working on it. It's very fun though.
It's fair enough.
That is my experience with the cats. What is your experience with the cats? Like the cat
So I
girls?
do want to go back to Lethe, because we kind of like showed these two units as though they were the same, but Lethe does at least exist for a short time in part 2, and I think it's worth bringing up because her performance in the part 2 maps is like good enough to call her one of your better units. I do think that in both of those maps, say like Lucia and Mordecai are better in the Fog of War map, and especially Neluchi. And then in Alencia's Gambit, I mean, you've got like so many other units, but Lethe does exist, right? And so if you want to take a really defensive approach, I generally find that Lethe and Mordecai are kind of capable of holding one part of it, right? Like, Mordecai's able to hold down the fort for a while, and then if he ever gets really dicey on gauge and needs to take a turn off, then Lethe can actually just get in there and last for a turn, and then that gives her enough time to kind of like go out and then be replaced by Mordecai afterwards. And Lyre doesn't really have any of that. In fact, Lyre is one of the few units in this entire game who are never ever free or forced to deploy. I think there's like 8 units in the entire game that don't have that entire quality. So anytime you deploy Lyre, you're undeploying at least one other person. And so for that reason, it's kind of like pretty easy for me to call Lyre like the worst unit in the game. Like all of the other common arguments for worst unit in the game, I could at least say, well, they're free to deploy here and they can do this. So, all of that's kind of better than what Lyre does, which is show up and then just like get dumpstered on immediately. Both of these cats are even like so bad at doing the whole like untransformed punch back thing to gain like more XP. Like you know that trick with Laguz, right?
I mean, you find like the one enemy that doesn't one round them when they're untransformed, and you have them like 1v1 them for one turn to get gauge.
Not to get gauge, but actually to get more EXP, right? Like that's kind of that's another like training thing that you can do for these Laguz, and even that like they can't really do it, right? Like they just get doubled in one round because they have 11 speed, 7 defense. Yeah, sure, they have a decent HP pool, but most part 3 enemies are kind of like capable of just destroying that in one go.
Yeah, I want to say they have like
so,
30 attack power total, right? So that's like on the cusp of one rounding Lyre.
Yeah, and maybe I just have bad memories because the first time I tried it, I picked a warrior, and that was a really bad idea. But maybe if I'd found like a halberdier or swordmaster, then I would have had better results. But yeah, even that's like, it takes a long time to kind of get them activated. And again, we kind of like brought up, oh, well, there's this unit called Ranulf, and his combat's okay, but not really that amazing. And how much work do you have to do for Lyre or for Lethe to get them to be basically the same as Ranulf? It is kind of depressing. I have trained them up to higher level once. Just Lyre, I think, has been that. It was actually my very first playthrough ever. I trained up Lyre and like brought her to tower and whatnot. It was because Gaytree liked her and I liked Gaytree. So so I brought it up. I do say like Rend is kind of a funny proc where like the math on paper is like Rend proc deals so much more damage than everything else. It's kind of silly, but aside from that, it's like not really any different than any other Laguz, right? Like they're grounded and then they hit things, and then when they proc their skill, they kill things.
It's strength
like,
times 5 or damage times 5?
It's strength times 5.
Yeah. That's
so
screen right now that says 35 damage. Some enemies would actually survive that, but I'm assuming you have to be transformed.
Yeah, but like, okay, even base Lyre when transformed, Rend proc is an additional 56 damage. Like when she hits, which is kind of a lot, right? So
no, that's enough. That's enough.
Yeah. But yeah, no, that's Lyre. I don't really have much imagination for this unit because even things like half shift smite are just better done by like 100 million other units that I really am pretty safe calling Lyre the worst unit in the game. And then Lethe up above is like, well, she has this utility for part 2, and then she's basically the same as Lyre for part 3, except like a little bit better, but not by enough for it to matter.
Yeah, they're put in here so you have something to make good rather than something that's already good. I'm pretty sure that was the purpose of them, or just for people who like cat girls. I think that's the only 2 reasons I can think of to use these units, but these reasons are valid and funny too.
There you go. I will say, Lethe, the 24, she needs like 1 speed proc to remain operable in part 3. That's like the only kind of like stat benchmark that I'd really have to give for Lethe is like 1 speed proc, and then she keeps doubling.
Yeah, I think with Lyre, either you dedicate yourself to spending 100 million turns on like 3-4, just taking like down ledge attacks like I did, I think, or you reserve some stat boosters for her to get her going, because otherwise you're in for a miserable experience. Mm-hmm. Well, you're in for a miserable experience either way, but this is to minimize the misery and maximize the fun, I think.
There you go. Good way to put it.
Okay. Speaking of units that are never force deployed and are never required to be fielded and are so easy to forget, We have Kyza. I think some patches call him Kyza. I saw that recently on another playthrough. He's not a cat. I thought he was for a long time ago. But he actually is a tiger, and he's... I think he's a little different from Mordecai in that he's not all just bulk and no speed and just a bunch of... Because Mordecai's defense is massive. I think he's coming up in a bit. Whereas Kyza is just slightly better stats than cats, like more balanced stats all around. But I've never used him long term even because he's just so unremarkable and kind of boring. But he did help a little bit in 3-4 because things weren't exactly going to plan. He just came in for a couple clutch hits here and there, and he was fine. And he was better deployed than whatever else I had. I might have had some units die recently to the point where I had room for him. Normally, I don't think you would have room for him if you wanted to deploy all your best units in all the deployment slots. But, Tiger Gauge is a bit better than Cat Gauge. It untransforms more slowly when he's in combat, and I think turn-wise too. That does mean he also transforms a little more slowly, but I think it works out to 2 turns of grass for both anyway, so that advantage doesn't really matter very much. And he just has a higher might Fang, 10 is more than what was it, the 9 that the other ones had? Yeah,
it's 8.
8, yeah. So that's a free +2 attack right there, plus the innate strength he already has, that's more. And sure, he doesn't double, but neither do the cats at base other than Ranulf. So oftentimes they still tie in that regard. And you can kind of expose him and he'll take a couple more hits and be fine. But if you do want him to make him good, you probably have to apply all the same fixes like speed wings, energy drops, Laguz gem in part 4, that kind of stuff. And then it probably make him work. But Kyza's just so unremarkable that it's hard to really justify it anyway. I don't know many people that do like Kyza, but he is definitely one of the units in Radiant Dawn. What do you think?
Yeah, he's again, he's the other one who is never force deployed or free to deploy, right? And now that you mention it, these are remarkably cat-like stats. I don't really blame you for not realizing that he was a tiger for so long.
It doesn't help if you never transform him.
Yeah, I know. It's they all just get one-rounded if I don't transform, so what's the difference anyway, right? I will say that this speed 22, we kind of complained earlier when Lyre had 22 speed, and Kyza's 22 speed is pretty similar, where it basically doesn't really double anybody. When he joins, it doesn't double anybody. Mages, maybe. Whoa. What a thrill, you can double mages. Great, I didn't have anyone on my team who could do that already.
Yeah, my Oscar died.
Oh, I guess you're kind of right there. Yeah, but even then, it's kind of weird for a lot of these other Laguz, because they join on 3-4, and then they're absent for 3-5, and then they can join again on 3-7, but there's nothing to do. So he's kind of neat in that regard, but these bulk stats kind of suck. 10 strength is awful. 10 defense is, when he's transformed, he's 12 points of defense behind Mordecai. 12 points of enemies might as well enemies might as well have gone from A to double S strike rank against Kyza. That's the difference in damage that Kyza takes versus what Mordecai takes. And I do kind of wish that we had spoken about Mordecai first, because there's kind of something there to draw that point of comparison to. But let me just forget about that for a moment and just talk about Kyza and say that there's kind of a very large pit to pull him out of, because he doesn't double. Even if he does double, he doesn't probably one round with this kind of attack power. And even then, he gets thumped so hard in return that, what is it that he can do at or near base that contributes meaningfully, besides stuff half shift smite things, which I will say, half shift smite is something he can do pretty well, right? It does exist. It's something he's allowed to do. And so I might as well give him credit for that. But even then, okay, suppose you do level him up. This is actually one of the times when, I gotta say the caps really matter in Radiant Dawn. Although Radiant Dawn caps, do actually matter more often than not. You'd be surprised. And things his speed cap being abysmally low really doesn't hurt him out that much, or really doesn't help him out that much. It's 15 speed cap, so when transformed is 30. And that's not doubling a lot of the enemies.
That's
even
Ranulf's
in
base speed, isn't it?
Mid part 3. Yeah, that's Ranulf's base speed. And less than Ranulf's base damage. And less than Ranulf's base defense. So what's going on here?
I think the idea with Kyza is just to make him look better than the cats. That's all I can think of, really. Because I was I didn't really praise him, but I call him very mid. But that's probably just in comparison to the cats who are bad.
Yeah, it's like all of these things that I can bring up are like, yeah, it's technically better than a cat, but like, so like it's still really bad. And at least with Mordecai, I think there's something there. But
Shall we look at
this is
Mordecai?
like, yeah, let's just go to Mordecai. I kind of want to talk about them instead.
Yes. Yeah, Mordecai is more lopsided, but honestly, just all around better when you think about it. Because I was like, well, Kyza is like kind of average, whereas Mordecai is less speed, but he's only got 9 speed compared to Kyza's 11, and neither of them are doubling anything without significant help. So Mordecai just goes all in. It's like, all right, I'm gonna have 18 speed, which when transformed doesn't even get doubled by a lot of enemies, other than the faster ones in like 3-4 and 3-7. So we can kind of take a lot of hits because he has 34 defense. Probably more if you actually use him a bit.
I will say this is actually a +1 from base.
Yeah, I was about to look
base
that up
is
too.
32.
I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah, his base is 16. Yeah, you're right. Still, 16, 32. He has a 45 growth, so if you use him a bit in part 2, it's not unreasonable that he procs it somewhere. But yeah, he's just really, really tanky. And I still don't think that taking hits by itself is super helpful for Laguz. I prefer him to actually do something back. And his attack power is... I mean, it's reasonable. A 28 attack with a Tiger Fang is fine. But because he's never doubling anything, there's no hope of building up that strike rank to anything meaningful. When the game was relatively new, there were some people doing, like, resolve memes with Mordecai, where you keep him untransformed, get him hit a couple times, and he gets below half HP. Then you transform him, and then you have a so-called fast tank that has... better speed, but it's really just 18 times 1.5, so like 26, 27, I want to say. And then you also, sure, you have 34 defense, but you also have half your HP, like 29 HP. So it feels a bit shaky, but I'm sure it's fun to make it work. Or you can just keep him untransformed, you have a punching tiger. That can also be very fun, I'm sure. But I think the main draw for Mordecai for me has just been, I think it's still there. Yeah, Smite is still there. Smite, Water Affinity, super high con and weight, so he could shove just about anyone he wants to, or pick up anyone he wants to. He's kind of hard to rescue drop around, so he probably ends up falling behind a little bit, but there's been a couple maps where I deployed Mordecai just to smite people around, and it's been reliable at that. And then every now and then he transforms, he hits a couple people, keeps someone safe, shoves them out of the way, rescues them, some kind of emergency things. He can do that without dying, and I think that's fine. Plus, he has all the part 2 utility, like everything we mentioned for Lethe kind of goes for Mordecai as well. Like, he's one of the better units there. He's actually one of the best units there. Like, he's significantly better than Lethe against most of the enemy types, I find. So, I think overall he's a positive contribution. He just doesn't hold up very well in the long term. But it's not like the cats where you have to invest heavily to maybe get something. It's that you get something initially, and then the moment you feel like he's no longer really helping, you just replace him with someone else. And for me, that's fine. Plus, I don't know, I just like Mordecai a lot as a character, so that also probably helps my tolerance of him. But I think he's helpful to have around. Not super massive impact, but pretty nice. What about you?
Yeah, I do really like the things you brought up between the Smite and the Water Affinity. Just kind of like showing off different points of utility that he has, and that's kind of what he is in my mind, is a utility character, right? Similar to you, I don't really put a whole lot of stock in like tanking, as it were. It like Fire Emblem is not really a game where you sort your units into like damage dealers and tanks, right? It's kind of like there are units with enough XP to do both, and then there are units with enough XP to do like neither, basically. But Mordecai at least does have the ability to like tank pretty reliably, even into like early part 4, right? And it's like 16 base defense doubled to 32. That's taking very little damage from enemies throughout most of the game. And again, that's like at base without any level ups. So it's a pretty impressive thing for him to be able to just like walk up and have like several paladins come at him and he's just totally fine. Because like his base defense is like so ridiculously high. Again, if all you're doing is tanking, like it's still not really solving the problem because the enemies are still there. But at the very least, if you're not really confident in, your part 4 or with any map, deploying Mordecai and using him in choke points, or just kind of like honestly using him and like deploying him and hitting people with him is like probably going to be helpful for you. And this is like if you're not confident in your unit's ability to both tank and deal enough damage to kill, right? Mordecai being deployed, even like not counting her at 2 range, can actually be a boon for that strategy, because it's like, yes, you should have gotten a unit better than that, but if you don't, well, here you are. And so the way you deal with it is by deploying Mordecai your tanks. The water affinity is really nice. I do think that is a nice point of utility because, again, it's +1 attack, +1 defense. And then once you get it all the way up to the highest support, it's +2 attack, +2 defense, which is just massive, right?
Yeah,
so here
Mist will
it's
appreciate
with
it for
Mist.
sure.
Yeah, here with Mist, you get the full 2/2 for B, but man, it's really good.
It is nice. I find it a little tricky sometimes to make use of a Laguz support bonuses, especially if the Laguz itself is not really a damage dealer, so you have to keep someone within 3 squares, or even 1 square to build the support, while also making sure that they're not in the way, like not in range of any archers. Like imagine him supporting Ike, for example. You don't want him to be behind Ike in part 3 or in part 4, for example, where he's like, I have to rack now, I'm gonna kill all these enemies, and then Mordecai's like, I'm right behind you. Like, it's like, no, don't be right behind me. That really jams my style, actually. So
yeah, at that point, you're looking for maybe some like resolve shade strategy, shade on Mordecai of all things.
I think if you wanted to support Mordecai, maybe what you do is like support him with Nephany. For like having Nephany get the water bonus seems kind of good, and Nephany's one of the few units who's good in the long term from part 2, right? So maybe that's something I want to try next playthrough.
Yeah, that actually seems really good. So I got it. Like her long-term combat definitely seems better than Mordecai's long-term combat. Like you kind of brought up the resolve thing, but that just seems like incredibly dubious.
Yeah, this is.
I don't want to come out and say it, but it seems pretty bad.
This is assuming you want to support a long-term unit with him, of course, which I think is questionable because of what I just said. With Mordecai, you don't really want him to see combat in part 3, or part 4 even. But you know, maybe there's something there. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah.
Seems like an exciting plan.
Anyway, 2 more Hawks or 2 more Laguz. Well, they're both Hawks. Spoilers. These are something else for sure.
Oh boy.
We've sung the praises of these units throughout the playthrough because honestly they're just really good. I think they were overlooked initially when Radiant Dawn first came out because they were very underwhelming in Path of Radiance stat-wise. Like they were like borderline doubling, barely doing much damage kind of deal, and they didn't do much to stand out. Plus, like managing Laguz gauge was just something that's a little more difficult to do if you're newer to the game. But now I think everyone recognizes that Ulki and Janaff are both ridiculously powerful units. You basically get 2 free Hars, but with a couple like minor drawbacks. Like we've been memeing on Laguz gauge for a while, but with the other units it was like, okay, these units all have significant problems, and then they also have Laguz gauge. Whereas with Ulki and Janaff, you get 2 units that are really, really good, but they have this drawback, which changes the mentality into, okay, how do I get around this problem to make these good stats work, as opposed to how do I make this drawback go away while also dealing with all their other drawbacks. It's a very different mentality. Like if you're a good unit, then people are willing to overcome what can possibly hold you back. And in Ulki and Janaff's case, it's not even that hard to stop them from working because Raisin is right there. So if you have a transformed Raisin, then you are pretty much guaranteed to have a transformed Ulki and Janaff next turn if you want to, with a couple of leafy grasses. And then they can just always be involved in some kind of plan with Raisin where they hit an enemy and then canter back in the diamond formation. Raisin revives them all, and then they can either attack again or they can grass, and you just kind of continue. And all you have to do is be careful that they don't get in range of like a crossbow or maybe like a really powerful wind tome somewhere, or like a silver bow maybe. But generally they can even survive that. It's really, really ridiculous. And I'm talking about these 2 as if they're 2 similar units, but these are things that kind of go for both. I'll just go into Ulki a little bit more now. So Ulki is, I think, the weaker of the 2, but he's still really, really strong and very, very useful, both in part 3 and in part 4. In part 3, I generally like to use the Hawks to weaken enemies for others, so that they still get the strike rank, but someone else gets the kill XP, because they are very overleveled. Raisins knows exactly how overleveled they are. I can never do the math. How overleveled are the Hawks generally?
They gain EXP. So with Laguz, you literally just multiply their level by 1.5. So in this case, they gain EXP as though they were a level 42 or a level 2 tier 3 promoted unit.
Yeah. So generally, I find that they get like single-digit EXP at best for part 3, and then part 4 it tends to be a little more than that. So generally, I feed the kills to someone else, and Ulki is kind of perfect for that because Ulki doesn't have the strength to one-on anyway, and all he cares about is strike rank. So you just have him double like a wyvern somewhere, and you have Nephany finish it off, and there you go. That's the best for both worlds. And Ulki's never in danger because he has that one of the few units in this game who actually has an innate skill that cannot be taken off of him, so it really counts towards his own. And so he just has 20 avoid and dodge. In this context, dodge is not crit avoid like it is in engage. It's just straight up avoid. Or actually, no, it's both. Never mind, it says both.
It's 20
actually is
avoid and 20
critical,
dodge,
yeah.
same as engage. Yeah.
Okay, I guess that terminology is actually consistent. Okay, I was like, wait, dodge is what?
I think
okay.
this is the first one that had avoid dodge. So
Oh, I see how it is. I see.
Radiant Dawn. Yeah.
But yeah, Ulki's avoid is insane. You can see it right there. He is not even transformed. He only has 18 speed, but he has 86 avoid. So Ulki has a shot at like dodging crossbows. You usually don't want to take that shot, but he has a reasonable shot at it. And then everything else just kind of flies past him. And even if it does hit him, transformed he has 22 defense and he has almost 60 HP. He's going to be fine. Like, he's a tank in that way. I don't like tanking with Laguz, generally speaking, but Ulki also deals a reasonable amount of damage back when he does counter. So I don't mind exposing him every now and then. The more strike rank he gets, the better. If he hits S rank strike for part 4, that'll help him one round a couple things. Because in part 4, I think the training wheels have got to come off. You just got a one round thing, so you're not really helping all that much. And he's not really great for endgame anyway, so generally the more he one rounds, the better. So setting that up is nice, but a little bit hard because at that point his strength is going to be really underwhelming. Still though, he flies around and he does enough damage to be worth exposing to combat, so I do really enjoy using Ulki. Raisins, do you want to weigh in on Ulki, or should we move on to Janaff first to like get them both for you as well?
They are pretty similar units, I gotta say. Like, okay, like there are obviously differences between them, but like they join at the same time and they do pretty similar things. I gotta say, like, as far as the, overall appreciation of Ulki and Janaff has gone, there's actually been like kind of a new, even like a new wave of people trying out Ulki and Janaff. I do know 2 LT series we know, Gordon and Don are actually working on 0%.
Oh,
it turns out Ulki and Janaff meet like a shocking number of late game benchmarks. And so part 3 for both of those people has basically turned into how much strike rank can we get on Janaff and Ulki.
So
like, I think Don now calls 3-7 like the hardest map in the game. Because of like...
I was so afraid of that too.
Yeah, because of like how much strike rank you can theoretically get. And it's not like other maps where like once you do the objective, you're done. On 3-7, like there's no telling. There's no telling if you've done enough on that map, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's so hard to do. But Ulki and Janaff, I mean, like, I want to point out quick, Ulki with 18 speed, when that doubles, it goes to 36, and that doubles everything. So, all right.
Yeah, there's so many
Pretty
units who
good.
can one round sword masters. It's really outstanding, actually. Good call.
Yeah, and so, like, if you manage to get to the vaunted double S strike, I'm pretty sure Ulki just kind of one rounds everything. Like, maybe generals he doesn't get, but like, come on, guys, all right? Like, be realistic here. But he kind of just doubles everything and one rounds everything, and it's actually kind of shocking that he's able to do so at base, right? And he has less strength than Janaff, whom we might as well move to now. Janaff is, what is this? Did we give him an energy drop too? Or?
I did, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so Janaff is Ulki with like minus speed and I think plus 2 points of strength or plus 4 when he's transformed. The loss in speed does not matter until like late part 4, at which point suddenly there are a few enemies which he needs to have leveled up speed at least once in order to double. I think this is 17 speed, but I think we leveled him up at least once and got this point of speed. So normally he has, I think, 34 when transformed, and that is actually not enough to double literally everything. Same as
This
Janaff.
is base speed, by the way.
Wait, seriously?
Yes. 34 is his base.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, I do know...
The strength is
like-
base plus energy drop, if you're curious.
Okay, good to know. So I do know that...
Also, he's base level. Sorry.
Yes, base level. Okay, fair enough. No, that's good. And it's good to have this information to be accurate. But I will say that like the thing I said about him doubling not necessarily everything is still true. Then if that's the case. He's normally like 1 strike rank. All of his benchmarks require him to be 1 strike rank lower than Ulki. But at the same time, like if he's doubling everything, getting that plus 5 damage is still really nice. And I gotta say, I think I've brought like literal base Janaff, not even like base plus stat booster, literal base Janaff into like endgame. And he was actually like totally fine, like better than all my Bjork. Still, he's nuts. It's
We're
crazy.
talking 0% or...
Like 0%. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Because otherwise I'd be wondering what the hell you've been doing with like Ike and Mia, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, I guess it is like, I should have mentioned it was 0%, but even that is like the fact that he can be at 0% and going into tower and is so excellent is like, dude, like he joins midway through the game.
Yeah.
And that's true of him. He's kind of nuts. So he's a pretty good unit, I gotta say. Again, like the challenge is building up as much strike rank as you can on each of these two units, and I think Janaff is hurting for it a little bit less than Ulki. Ulki kind of like really needs the S rank for part 3 and really needs the double S for part 4, but
yeah, or
Janaff
some other
can
kind of
kinda be
favoritism.
one behind.
There's like,
Yeah.
sorry to butt in, but there's something important that we probably should discuss here in this point.
Oh yeah.
And that's that there are several ways to make them hit either 1-round thresholds or have like proc chance to 1-round things, like several good ways. And one of them is the energy drop that you already mentioned. I think it gets enough there for most enemies. Again, I like to use Albert Hughes as a benchmark. I think he gets those with an energy drop. And I think Ulki can probably hit some of those too with an energy drop. Another way you could do is give him Adept, which they have a massive chance of activating because of their aforementioned massive speed. So that's one way to go on around. One problem I have with Adept though is that I think adapted hits don't count for strike rank, right? So
I believe you're right.
So if you are hitting an enemy you 2-hit KO, say a Swordmaster, and you would proc adept on your first attack, then you get 1 less strike rank than you otherwise would have, which is going to hold them back. Because I actually looked at the strike rank. It's like 1/3 of the way through, and I used Janaff apparently like 21 times. I think that's usually how many times I used him, 21 XP for 21 combats. So you do really have to dedicate, and maybe even focus on 1 if you're not done, to try and get them to S rank if you can, and putting adept on them will hurt that. Another way could be bonus experience. You get him to 30, and then you give him a Satori sign, of which you get way too freaking many, and then they will get tear, which is just a mastery skill. It activates and it kills. It's basically a critical hit. But again, if you crit when you would have otherwise 2-hit KO'd, or you would have just hit twice, you lose out on some strike rank. So it's something that I generally prefer to do once you enter part 4, because at that point I care more about 1-rounding than I care about building up strike rank. Like at that point, if they don't have strike rank, I don't really care. I just want them to use them to kill things. But
yeah,
generally that's the way I go about it. I gave him the drop early this time because it's ignorance. It's a little bit more difficult. I just want if he's 2-hit KOing anyway, it's not going to hurt his strike rank. If he's not 2-hit KOing, this is now going to give him, like, it's going to get rid of the kill experience for someone else, but it also gets rid of an enemy. So I think it's worth to give the energy drop to them in part 3 if you want to. But the others I usually hold back on. How do you usually treat that little dilemma?
The Satori sign or the bonus XP?
Yeah, stuff like that, or the I generally prefer Adept because you don't have to Bex. You can save the Bex for other things, but I don't know, maybe you like it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like 1 level of Bex, and like, you know, again, in chapter 3-11, I think it is, you get like so much bonus EXP that you may as well, right? But I do agree with you that I think the Satori sign early on is like kind of a trap, and like it steals your strike rank. And what's the point? Like, you kill everything anyway with Janaff, so like just build strike rank instead best you can. The Adept is, I agree, it's pretty well placed on Janaff and Ulki. Like everything you said about Adept letting you reach a kind of lofty 1-round KO benchmark is true of theoretically all units, but with Janaff and Ulki, their proc rate is so much higher that like you may as well. So I do think that these units also are generally pretty good for their mobility and flight, which is something we haven't really brought up.
Yeah,
they're
on top of everything else.
Yeah, like they're one of the few units in the game who can shove and canto, which is like kind of nice sometimes. And like I guess Ravens can theoretically do it too, but the Ravens are so like small that the list of people they can shove is not really that good. And then another thing I kind of want to bring up is the water affinity on Ulki, because I didn't really bring that up, but
yeah, I mean, they support each other here, so the support bonuses look the same, but yeah. It's thanks Ulki.
The water affinity on Ulki, and they build a pretty fast support. I know most people tend to like put them in the same army for part 4, and that's probably a pretty fine idea, frankly. Again, they're like pretty similar units, and they require pretty similar investment. So you might as well just kind of like have them go together and then use their fast building support to give like attack +2 and defense +2 to units, right? So it's kind of nice.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of situations where you don't want them in the same army, which makes supporting them together maybe not the best idea ever. But yeah, I think part 4 might be so spread out for them because these are 2 units that are very self-sufficient and also very good at just killing things or getting close to killing over a couple turns. So they might be apart from the army anyway, like their support partner might still keep up with them anyway. So maybe you just assume the support is not going to matter a whole lot for part 4 in general. So you just get whatever you can. And in that case, I think Janaff, Ulki, it's very easy to build him 3-7 because you're not doing a whole lot. Again, if you're not trying to optimize for strike rank, so you might as well have them shove each other a couple times to build support and like have them end adjacent like that. I don't know. I do like the Water Affinity for sure. Janaff's wind is less impactful, but it's still nice at times. Like they are close to one running sometimes, so having the +1 or +2 attack is really nice.
Right. Does Janaff actually have wind, or does he have light?
I'm pretty sure he had wind. Let me see. This is water. Oh, thunder. Never mind. Thunder is kind of good.
Right. Okay.
It doesn't really matter because I did mention earlier that Ulki has insight, which increases his voice. But don't get me wrong. Like Janaff also dodges like almost everything that people throw at him.
No.
It's just he doesn't have a whole lot else to show for it. Like he has insight, which increases hit. These guys will always have like 100 hit on almost everything they fight. That's not on terrain, I find.
I've never seen this skill be relevant ever. I mean, the vision by 5 thing. I've like
this is why I like
deploy him in
Ike
army for the funny vision 5. But I mean, honestly, like you have so many torches and torch staves that like just use those too. But this helps.
I know there was an old speedrun strat where Janaff uses a torch turn 1 to get massive vision in 4-1, the Ike chapter. To get
the only chapter it can proc, right?
Yeah, basically for Ulki, it's the only time it ever does anything, and then you can transform him next turn, and he has like more vision. I guess that could be welcome, and I think they're a good fit for Ike's team actually, if you want them there, because they the benchmarks you have to hit for Ike's part 4 are I think the highest overall. So having their like super overkill combat there theoretically makes the most sense. But I think I can only afford to do it if I think I'm satisfied with my desert lineup, and with Jill dead, I only have like one really good customizable flyer in Har. Like I don't have Jill to send there. I don't have Marcia. I train her, so it's gonna have to be depending on like whether I have enough faith in the flyers I have there, if I'm gonna split my hawks or not. Because I think I would like to send one over to the Silver Army in theory.
Yeah, I mean, there is one flyer who's forced into Silver Army, right?
Yeah,
that,
true.
You know, we could go into next. But...
Yeah, shall we look at them? Because we're kind of done with the furry convention, I think.
Yeah, I think we've kind of said everything about Laguz. The main idea is like build the strike rank, right? So
yeah, just they're a very different bunch, the furries, but I did enjoy praising the hawks for 50 minutes straight. That was fun.
I will say like their EXP gain is so trash, so like you may as well treat them as being a base. And thankfully for Janaff and Ulki, their base stats are just so good that like the only thing missing is strike rank, right?
Yeah, it really widens the gap between the good Laguz and the bad Laguz, is that experience rate. For sure, because I think Lethe is some of the better growth between all of them, but it really just doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's like they don't level up. You never use this mechanic.
All right, let's get to the Falcon Knights. There's still Falcon Knights here. We have Sigrun,
oh, wow.
And we have Tanith. Well, I guess we'll just look at Sigrun first. I do think these units are like fairly different despite all the similarities, but I've never really been able to get a good grasp of just how good they are because I tend to neglect them a little bit. But I am training Tanith this run, so we'll see. But I guess we'll go with Sigrun first. The big thing with Sigrun is that she starts, I think this is her base level. I think she joins at like literally level 19, but I'm going to double check just to make sure. And then what sticks out to me always is this is her base level. She has an awful 25% speed growth. So the speed base of 24, I think it would have been like fine if she joined in 3 prologue or so. Then she would just double most things. But by 311, the benchmarks are much higher. So frequently, whenever I checked Sigrun's combat forecast in playthroughs that were not ignorance, I'd be like, wow, this is really underwhelming. And I'd repeat that process like a couple more times just to make sure that she was actually that awful, because her base level suggests different. Like a unit that joins level 19, you'd expect them to be, you know, nearly competent, maybe a promotion away from being really good, but Sigrun just falls short on everything. They made a flying forward, I feel like, sometimes.
Yeah.
And that really hurts. Their other growths are like alright, but not like a Lynchia tier where they're super quick to patch up. This is just a nice fiddle to have. She's forced onto the Silver Army for part 4, and just by virtue of being a flyer in the desert, she'll always be somewhat helpful. You can give her a Horse Slayer to be okay against the Paladins and for Prologue, but you probably also have someone else who does more with it. I think Sigrun doesn't even always want it KO the Paladins there with the Horse Slayer, but it could be wrong on that. You probably know better than I do with the 0% knowledge and everything.
So she definitely does double those guys.
Oh, okay.
The main problem with Horse's Lair is actually hit rate on that, because like God. you can't forge a Horse's Lair, so it's not like you have the plus 10 hit like you do with basically every other weapon that you're using at that point. So the hit rate is kind of shaky, but like at the end of the day, you are doubling and you are one rounding. Okay, I should say you're doubling with a promote. But the promote for Sigrun, I mean, like look at her level, like
yeah, It's a
Just
level
promoter.
and then maybe another level or a crown if you have one lying around, but you probably don't.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think
I'm-
she's like an okay filler, I guess, but I'm always underwhelmed, and game over condition does not help there. So I don't really like Sigrun all that much, other than like some minor utility in the chapters that she's forced in. That's my whole take on Sigrun, basically.
Fair enough. I mean, the chapters that she's forced in is every single chapter from her joining until Tower, right? So like, you know, that is still a lot of chapters.
It's like 5, right?
And yeah. So I'm kind of curious because like she's unpromoted now. Do you like have a habit of keeping her unpromoted? Because I'm pretty sure every time I've used Sigrun, I've just immediately bexed her to 21, like immediately. Maybe there was one time where I like did Paragon to get her to 21 very quickly instead. But I'm kind of curious, like do you usually keep her at 19 or?
Yeah, I think 311 is when she joins, and it's also when I get that bunch of bonus experience we've talked about a couple times already. But my first priority with that bonus experience is always to promote my other units first, because everyone I have in tier 2 at that point is either ready for some nice, juicy, like strength defense level ups on Mia or something, or they just want to get levels and promote. And once I've done that, then maybe I'll consider getting the Sigrun to tier 3. And I don't remember how it works out usually, but generally I don't have so much left over that I'm also have enough to do everything I want and then do Sigrun, because Sigrun for me is a low priority unit. So she comes last on my list. But maybe next time I play, I'll do it, or maybe this time I'll have enough Bex to, do it. But I do have other training projects as well, so it feels kind of wasteful to Bex per for me, because she's not someone I want to do a whole lot of combat with. It's almost like using Olivia Grass on Ranulf in that way. Like it's a force unit that I don't really find optimal in combat. Plus, like Tanith, who we're going to talk about in a minute, I find her much better in that regard. And maybe even a better target for bonus experience, depending on how her stats shake out at that point. But yeah, I usually don't promote her with the Bex, but maybe I should.
It's kind of I guess part of it is like a difference in play style, because I get there and I kind of see that like 24 speed doubles nothing on 3-11 and 26 speed doubles basically everything on 3-11. So to me, it's like a kind of really high priority.
Oh, true.
Promotion.
It's true.
So, but
it's just
I can really understand it too.
Maybe it might partially be 0%. But it might also just be like, yeah, I can make Sigrun double things, but at that point, 311, all my other units are also like super, super good. So if I have a tier 3 Gatri, a Ragnell Ike, and a tier 3 Mia, and a tier 3 Titania, and a tier 3 Har, how relevant is getting Sigrun to double things going to be?
I guess that is a pretty good point too. So, and I'm not gonna like try and contrive some point. I'll just like actually just yield that to you completely. Is like, yeah, if you've got all these other training projects that are now paying off, I can see the attraction to using those guys instead, or to Bexping Tanith, whom I think is just a totally better investment target in general. Like, have we said enough about Sigrun to move on to Tanith? I think there's like one other thing about Sigrun, and that is she's forced to Silver Army, but that's it. That's the only thing.
Yeah, it hurts her flexibility, but it's also like the best place for her to go. So I don't think theoretically you'd send her anywhere else anyway. Like, well, she's not going to be doing anything on the Grow Mercenaries route, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can't think of anything she'd do.
Yeah, I think like I'll definitely try promoting her next time I use her. That's like the last thing I'll say. And I think it's probably not a bad idea. I just don't know exactly what the cost would be, and I don't know exactly what the return would be. That's the main thing. But I can see it being a decent investment, like a short-term investment. Plus, you profit from it throughout Part 4 if you do it. So if you're going to dedicate Bex to her at all, like if you're going to get her to promo at all, you're probably best off doing it in 311.
I would agree.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the actual investment project. Tanith here at 19.76, so 24 away from the level 20, and then one more level away from promoting. And Tanith, I've actually not hated using her. She does feel a bit worse than Sigrun at base. I'm going to double check how far she's from bases. I find that her base speed is actually one lower than Sigrun. Mine got one level up out of 3, so normally she'd be at 23. And then whatever she gains from level up. So she's like speed screwed by 0.2 points, I guess. But there's a chance you'll have 25. And I think at that point, like it's really, really close. I chose not to Bex Tanith because I do want her to be long-term viable, maybe even tower viable, depending how things shake out. And for that, I think she needs every normal level up she can get before that time. I don't think there's a very good chance of her to like cap anything meaningfully to actually Bex Pip use in tier 2. There's only like 4 tier 2 levels up to begin with. And she starts a bit too far away from the caps to really make it work. But there might be some potential in tier 3 there if we get enough bonus experience. But unlike Sigrun, like she actually has some decent growth lying around. Like she's got 10% more strength and 15% more speed. Now, compared to the other units, she's probably still kind of bad. I think the fact that she doesn't use axes and she's weak to bows, unlike Har and Jill, really makes her look like a bad flyer. Janaff and Ulki also like fly circles around her in a lot of ways. So, just not super impressive, but the way I look at Tanith is you already have the flyer utility, and then everything else you can get out of her is just a cherry on top that can work. So, if you get a halfway decent combat unit out of it for part 4, it's probably worth, and then you have like a slight chance of having some kind of tower viable unit. But it definitely takes some work. I just like playing Fire Emblem and always having a training project to work on. Part 4 can feel kind of boring if you have no goals other than the chapter's main goal, which is route enemy like 4 out of 5 times. So that can get a little bit old for me. So I like to have someone that is just like, oh, I can set up a kill for this unit. Yay, that's fun. You know, dopamine activates, whatever you want to call it. So that's why I'm training Tanith, partially just to get that out of the way. But for her to do anything, she probably will have to promote, and I might just Bex her this last level and then get her to promotion so she can fully contribute in part 4 for prologue, maybe Horslayer some paladins, and you know, maybe she'll be turning up in endgame. I think it'd be the first time I bring Tanith to endgame. I'm really curious how it's going to be, because she seems theoretically kind of viable, but I say kinda because I think there's a decent chance she either won't have the strength to 1 round or the speed to double, and that kind of worries me. But I also like Tanith, so I want to try. Have you tried?
Yeah, I'm actually really kind of shocked to hear that you've not tried late game Tanith yet, because from what I can tell, and maybe this is just like Kirby Master rubbing off on me, like from what I can tell, Tanith is kind of like one of the like part 4 darlings, as it were, of like, you know, units who fly and have good combat and have good 1-2 range, right? Like it's like Har and then Jill and then question mark, I guess Tanith.
Yeah.
Right. And I do know like Speedrun uses her as the Hawk Army carry. I know, again, because she activates the 1-2 range very well. And again, I'm kind of surprised you haven't tried it. She very at times gets a crown from me just because like she shows up at level 16 is like, oh, I can promote her and she's good. But 16 is like, that's just too far away for me to Bex. So I use the crown on her anyway. And the whole using swords thing, like, yeah, forged lances aren't really that good, but with swords, and especially in Hawk Army, the leadership stars really kind of overcome the low mind of swords, or the low hit of swords. Like, if you check out the Storm Sword stats, right? Like, it's not really that great hit. The Tempest Blade is slightly better, and you get a few of them. But the thing is like, you can't forge swords, or you can't forge the 1-2 range swords, so you're limited on the number of them, and you're limited on the hit rate. So you might as well send them into the army that requires, like, it requires 1-2 range, but it requires at least 1-2 range, and you have leadership stars, and that's Hawk Army. Oh. Right? So, like, taking her there and having, like, the Storm Swords and the Tempest Swords and some Forged Javelins, like, generally ends up being a pretty good idea, just because, like, all of the weaknesses of the 1-2 range swords, both their limited uses and their rarity, and their low hit rate, kind of get overcome, just by the kind of circumstances of that army. And when you have the promotion, she does double like quite a fair number of things in that. If you have the promotion and growth, she doubles like a lot of things in that. And she just kind of like eviscerates the entire map. So again, I'm kind of surprised you haven't tried that, because a lot of the people I talk to, this is a really common strategy, but maybe that's more so an easy mode or normal mode thing. And I haven't been keeping up with the hard mode meta as much.
I think it's just one of those things that's like on my list of things I want to do eventually and never end up doing. But from what it sounds like, you can actually do it in like any playthrough and it works out reasonably well. So yeah, probably might be there.
Well, to be fair, like you say, it's might be, but like there's 73 playable units in Radiant Dawn, right? I can't expect you to have used like all of them in part 4, right?
No, this one is closer. Like, this is not Edward. Either way, I'm very curious to see how Tanith is going to shake out from here, especially as a long-term project. I'm really hoping to be able to take her to endgame. I think that is all the units that we have recruited up to the end of part 3. I don't believe we've forgotten anyone. We had all these Laguz that we forgot. We have the Falcon Knights. We have the new Laguz. There are some part 4 units here that we will definitely discuss at some points, maybe after the game's over, maybe before we go into endgame. I haven't decided yet. But this is it. This is all we have up until this point. It's been fun analyzing and overanalyzing them to hell and back. And I guess next time you watch this, we'll actually be wrecking enemies left and right with the part 4 people.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it.
All right, then in that case, I'll see you all, including you, Raisins, for prologue.
Yep.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Raisin is very good.